Okay, cool. So user experience, hopefully this will be useful to everyone, but definitely going to be a little bit more broad, but hopefully interesting. So the first question, what is user experience? I can tell you, oh, there we go. What is user experience? It is not making it pretty. Please don't tell any designers to say like, can you do good UX and make our thing all pretty? Because no, I mean, like, yes, we would want it to look nice, but that's not what UX is about. And so therefore, since it's not with how pretty it looks, it's not the same as user interfaces. So if you ever see, oh, that's the next one. If you ever see memes like these, where they're like, oh, the old tomato, I mean, ketchup bottle is the UI, and then the UX is where they improved it because based on, the poor experience with the glass bottle, this one's so much easier to use and things like that. But really, they're both interfaces, and the UX is your actual experience using those interfaces. So hopefully that helps. But I think the best explanation is that user experience is the look plus the feel plus usability. So it's like the umbrella, it's everything. It's how it works and how it's built and how it's structured, but also how it looks. But it's not just how it looks. So for UX, there's a couple different design processes, human-centered design and design thinking. So design thinking, it usually starts with research, trying to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then trying to understand who are the people that you're designing this for, or you're trying to do creating a product for, and making sure that you're actually solving the right problem. Because I think it was Henry Ford who says, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So that's why you really want to make sure you actually know the correct problem that you're trying to solve and not trying to just do what a customer or a client would want. So that's like the emphasize, define. Testing, we do a lot of wireframes and prototypes and have them in front of people to actually interact with it and see, do they understand or do they know how this works right away? Is there anything that they can't figure out without explanation? And that's something you want to go back and fix. And the ideate, that part that's before the test. I didn't make this diagram, I'm sorry. But for ideating, you do a lot of brainstorming, you work with a group. You are, like, it's not just designers. The designers are not in a silo, just making these magical designs out of nowhere. You're working with a team trying to come up with, okay, this is the problem, this is what we found in our research, and this is how we are one of the solutions that we will try. And this diagram, the reason why I had this one versus the other one, but this one reminded me of this diagram, the Devops diagram. So it's the same concept in that it's iterative, it keeps going, it's continuous, it's not a waterfall that just goes from like, okay, we do this, do this, do this, do this. There's always, we're making corrections if it turns out the testing didn't go well in that, or no, it went well, but the customers couldn't understand how to use it, then we got to go back. We got to go back and go back to the design, do it again, deploy, that sort of thing. It's a very similar process. So what does UX look like? People might think UX as of what the bottom right, like the little mock-ups and the little cell phone or the monitor screens or whichever that are very shiny, that are on Dribble. If you ever go on Dribble, that's what you might be thinking of for UX, but UX is more the process behind it. So the ideation I was talking about before, that's like the Post-it notes. It's kind of a meme, but like it is like one of the ways that we would getting all your ideas out, even like not judging ideas and trying to find patterns and analyze your data. And then doing like really quick sketches, your wireframes, just to get the ideas out there. It looks not so pretty. It doesn't look like what you would find on Dribble, but it helps so much for you to be able to take a wireframe, show it to somebody. Can they understand what this wireframe is supposed to be showing them? Can they do a task that the design is supposed to help them do? And on the top right is a persona. So some personas, I've seen it used in some DevOps contexts where you have a persona for each of your type of customers. It's kind of a character that's based on your research, based on what are the different needs and requirements, what do they want, what are their common behaviors. You would do this for different groups. So if it were a school website, there would be students, there would be parents, there would be teachers, like 3 separate groups that you would want to do personas for, and then do your designs informed by those personas. Okay, so why is this so important? Bad design in general, it results in anger and frustration, less productivity, higher error rates, and tied with that is physical and emotional injury. People literally die because the interface was complicated and there was an error made and lives were at stake. And it also costs money if that, everything else doesn't matter to you, it costs money. So that's why it's still important. So how does this tie with DevOps? If you're going through the design process, you're understanding the problem before you build the wrong thing. So again, don't make faster horses. Don't just go like, okay, the users say they want this, this, and this, but you really want to understand why do they want this? Why do they think this is the solution? And then you can find what the actual solution is. It also helps you find the issues quickly before you put everything in production. Super great with prototypes because it's not coded, it's much faster, saves a lot of time, saves a lot of money. You can find the issues before the developers have to go and like code everything only to find out, oh, this isn't working. I believe the quote used was, if the user can't see it, it's not there, because if they can't see it, they can't use it. It's kind of pointless. It doesn't matter if it's functional. They need to be able to see it and use it. You also can reduce the number of changes in your user requirements if you find out, make it correct the first time, if you truly understand your user before you start everything, rather than like midway, we're like, oh, actually, we need to account for this or that. All things you could have done at the beginning to save you time and money. And again, I say ideally, the UX design process would go around at the planning stage. I say ideally because it doesn't always really work out that way, especially with sprints and with deadlines. And it depends on where you are and how much UX has been supported by a company. A lot of times it gets kind of like pushed out of the way and you kind of just struggle and you do what you can and try to still, I mean, it's still something that will improve your product for sure, but it's not always an easy 1, 2, 3 step. In school, that's how they taught it. And in real world, it's like, that's not how it works. You have to do the testing before you do research, before it's not a perfect set of lists. So what are some common pitfalls? Not enough collaboration. I think this ties it very well into DevOps. I remember my first conference, everyone was talking about taking down the silos, no silos, and development and operations together. UX is the same way too. It's not designers just stuck in their own silo, making magic. you have to work with the people who are going to develop it, people who work closely with your users. So that can be the people who work with customer service, really, and your project manager. Everybody is involved. And it's easier to do these type of processes when you have everyone on board and everyone feels like they have a say into what ends up being the design. And it just makes everything so much easier. Development, design, everything. Another pitfall is not understanding who your users are. You might say, oh, we're designing for everybody. That's not possible. Please don't do that, because then you end up designing for nobody, right? You really want to understand what is it they actually do, what they actually need. There's a lot of examples of, startups that kind of failed because they didn't really address a real issue, or they just did not focus on who their user would have been. And tying in with that, forgetting that you are not your user is another pitfall. Sometimes when I'm working with my developers, one of them will say, well, I would have the button over here because this is how I would use it. But it's like, Gary, you're not our user. You are not a security compliance expert. Like, how you use it doesn't really matter, because you want to design for the people who actually are dealing with the security compliance. So try not to put your own, like, oh, this is how I would do this, or how I would do that. Trying to avoid that. Even if it's a product that you would use yourself, there's also going to be a lot of different people that are not you that are also going to be using your product. And also just a good way of removing bias. Silicon Valley is kind of really bad about that, where they're not really testing outside of their circle. I think Stadia was an example where it's like the gaming thing from Google, and it required a higher internet speed or internet connection that nobody else in the rest of the country has. And so like no one can really use it. They only designed for the people who are in this part of California with this access of technology, majority white, majority male, things like that, and not really thinking about how could it affect people with disabilities or people who have less access to technology, kind of thing. And tying in with that, you don't want to make assumptions. Assumptions are really bad. You might start off with assumptions because you just don't have the research ready, or they're like, oh, please make magic, go do this. Okay, you'll end up making some assumptions, but you don't want to rely on those. And you definitely don't want to base all of your decisions on what you assume to be true without verifying whether it is or not. And again, it's like, you are not the user. Don't assume that everyone's going to use an interface the same way you are. How people, their mental models, how they think something is going to work based on their past experiences is going to be different from yours. And finally, skipping usability testing. Some people will be like, okay, we got the wireframes, we got it designed. Okay, Iris, I'll take it from here. We'll make it all, functional and everything's coded. But you need to do the usability testing. This is also the easiest part, I think, for me to show the value of UX, because when you can put the results of, when I put this interface in front of a user and they could not find this button in order to go through this whole process to do the task that we're designing this product for, it says so much. And that really convinces like the higher ups, the CEOs, like, no, we need to test before we put in more effort, more time, and putting out a product that no one's gonna like. And some resources, if you're still interested in UX, hopefully. A really good book is Don't Make Me Think. It's focused on web usability. but he talks about different type of, there's like specific applications. So if you're making a website, it's really good. He talks about the navigation, information architecture, but the idea of a design is good when a user doesn't have to think about how to use it. They should be able to use it right away. Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. I have my students read it. It's more on the like not immediately applicable for digital products, but he has all the design principles and concepts that are really interesting. So I highly recommend it. Lean UX. This will be more of how the UX can tie in with agile and other DevOps kind of processes. I'm sorry if I'm showing my ignorance, but it's a good book with that. It's tying in with a process that you're already having, that you're already doing. And if you like podcasts, you might like 99% Invisible. They're really cool, just talking about different designs that you don't really think about. And they did a video with Vox talking about Norman doors and how human-centered design can change a lot. And what does it mean to be good design, to have good design? Oh, I don't know if we want to watch it. Probably not, maybe.
I've got the name written down, and I've watched this video with my family. It's a great video. I'll be sure to grab the link and we'll send it out to the crew for viewing afterwards.
Awesome. Yeah, because it's so great. It's so well done, and it explains it so well.
Yeah, it's a good one. That's really the title. It's not you. Bad doors are everywhere.
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah, and hopefully after you watch it, now you can't unnotice all the bad design everywhere, especially doors. And that is all. Are there any questions of things maybe more specific that wasn't really covered, or something that was too broad?
I don't know if you can see me. I do have a question. I'm designing a website for seniors. Is there any resources are there any resources that you know of that I can just peruse because the only thing I can think of is make the font bigger. That's like
yeah, so there's not any on top of my head, but I can get some links and articles for you if we can transfer that.
Yeah, if anything that you can get over to us, Iris, we can send out to the group.
I got Keisha's contact info. Hi, Keisha.
Hi. That was my question.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good to think about, and that it's really good that you're thinking about, how are they going to use it. Bigger text is certainly one thing. High contrast is also good. So when you have your text and any imagery, that's important information. You want to try to have enough contrast. Honestly, research. If you can talk to the people who are going to be your users, depending on what kind of context it is or what the purpose of the website is for, that will help you get you like actual answers. Because there are some things that I think you'll come across. Actually, there's a podcast for that too. Someone was designing a music app for older generations, and they actually found some really interesting insights that wasn't because they also assumed larger text, but it went beyond that. So I will get those to you.
All right, and we've got a question came up through chat. Do you have a source or a suggestion for identifying or creating persona workshop for new POs?
Ooh, another one that I'll have to find links for. The thing with personas, it's really tricky. Sometimes you have to make sure that you're basing it off of research, because if you go off of assumptions, you might just go into a territory of stereotypes. and that will not help improve your design. You also want to keep it on task. Like, is it relevant to what we're designing for? One of the personas at my team, like before I joined and they gave this to me, one of the personas, like, he drinks Bud Light, and I'm like, that doesn't help me at all with designing for security compliance. So you want to be careful. You do want to emphasize with people, with your personas, and have like more details about their background, but you do want to try to keep that relevant. Sorry. There's a couple different ones. I'll also look that up for POs. Sorry that I don't have any on top of my head.
I have a question. What process do you use to optimize your user interface designs to reduce the amount of clicks a user might have to take? And is that something that you generally try to build into the designs you're making?
It is something that you want in the back of your mind, but it shouldn't be your focus.
Okay.
There's so many quotes from all these UX people, but it shouldn't matter how many clicks it takes as long as I don't have to think about it.
Okay.
So if it takes 3, or like if you took only 1 click, but you had to search the entire page for that 1 link or that 1 button,
Okay.
then that causes a lot of frustration and wastes more time versus if I clicked 3 times, but I knew it right away.
Right, that's a good point.
So you don't want to, I mean, you don't want 7 clicks, but you don't want to only rely on the number of clicks as your measurement of this is good design or not.
Okay.
But definitely do testing.
Right. So kind of going off of that point, do you recommend that buttons that are critical to the user design and really important to the user experience be always present somewhere on the screen?
I mean, if you want them to click on it, yes.
Okay. So
It should be
that
visible
kind
to
of
them.
goes into the point of, you know, not having the user think about what buttons they need to click on or how to use the user interface.
So the Steve Krug book, will it go back? This book will be really good for that.
Okay.
They talk about navigation and that, like, how do you categorize your pages so people can find information like that.
All right.
Breaking down your links, chunking information.
Right.
Think that'll help.
Yeah, chunking information is definitely an important one.
Yeah.
Got another one from chat. Sorry, Roman. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're all right.
Okay. Coming out of chat. So you described UX as look plus feel plus usability. How would you describe the feel of a site?
The feel would be when you're using it, does it, the behaviorism. So it's not necessarily how it looks, but is this easy for me to use? Am I able to find things right away? Is it doing things quickly? Can I do my task? So in your experience, when you're doing your tasks that you're trying to do with this product or interface or whichever, do you feel good about it? Not sure does that help?
So Lisa asked if it means enjoyment. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
enjoyment is certainly part of it. I mean, it's not your highest priority, depending on what your interface is. If it's about taxes, I don't think you can really do much about joy, but you can make things easier and like reduce the amount of friction a user has when they're doing things, or reducing confusion, making things very straightforward. Does that help answer? I'm not sure.
I think so. I mean, I feel like it's a qualitative type of measurement.
Yes, yeah, there are a lot of things in UX is more qualitative than quantitative. If you do A/B testing, that will help you with more quantitative, but I think qualitative, you get really good understanding because numbers won't tell you what your users are thinking. So that's why you have to really do research with the users. And shoot, I'm losing my train of thought.
Sounds like some of those kind of cross over into usability too. So how do you differentiate
Yes.
usability and feel?
Sorry?
How do you differentiate between usability and feel?
That's true. Usability, I think, would be efficiency. Like, just is it efficient? But I think how you feel about it is the feelings. It's the behavioral. So it's not just the efficiency by itself. It's how does the user go through the process and how they feel about that. If that makes, does that help at all?
I think so, a little bit, yeah. Thanks.
There's an emotional aspect to design as well. There might be some good sources. I'm not sure if it would help practicality wise. But like, it's like things like the mechanical keyboards, they all look the same. They have all the same functionality. You're gonna type on it, but people will argue over cherry reds over cherry blues. My coworkers were arguing about it, but like that sort of, that's the feeling for the user, why they would prefer one over the other.
I might add something. My thinking is, hi, I'm Lisa, first time here. So, and I don't have my camera working, so you'll have to just deal with my voice. What I think is when it comes to like sites like Airbnb or the app like Robinhood, it has a certain, it evokes a sense of like, okay, when you click into Robinhood, it's like, all right, investments. It makes you feel good, like that you're knowing the numbers and the way that it's laid out, and it has a different contrast to other sites. So Airbnb, you get on that site and like, oh, this is exciting. I want to go somewhere. I want to experience something because of how it's laid out and different options that they provide. And it just kind of has a certain flow to it, how it's laid out, because it has like a scrolling banner, experiences, places to go. And so it for the user, it evokes a certain psychological effect on them that makes them want to stay or book a room or buy a stock. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's kind of like, so the context is relevant because you wouldn't sell an Airbnb with the same look and feel of a website that's doing like your taxes or whatever.
Right.
So you have to take that into account, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's basically like the tone. It's the vibe that you're conveying in your product and your site. So and you know, typography and all that stuff kind of goes in there too, you know. And yeah, it's different little nuanced factors that play into the whole presentation of it. A lot of times I think we take it for granted just because it's there for us and we don't really think about it. And that's why we have Don't Make Me Think. So yeah. But yeah, I'll stop there. I don't want to ramble on.
Airbnb is a great example. It's not just how they're presenting the information, it's how they present the task itself to the user. I think where the success of Airbnb comes in is how they display all the different places on the front page. It really encourages exploration. So maybe you don't have an exact destination in mind, but it'll give you inspiration to think like, oh, I could possibly do this or do that. That definitely ties into psychology, getting people to stay on, kind of just go through all the rooms, right? And just think about like, oh, totally do this trip. And that'll keep them like, that'll get you more customers that are staying on the site and then not purchasing, but renting the rooms. The design is all part of that. Yeah.
Right. And the other thing I want to add to what Roman was kind of speaking of earlier, inquiring about the clicks and things like that. Another thing to think about with UX is that you want to make sure that things kind of aren't a stupid loop. What I mean is, or like dark experiences.
Yeah, dark
because
design.
yeah, like I had experienced that this morning actually. Long story short, I'll try to be exact. I logged into Instagram. I have an account. I hadn't logged in for like several years. And I did it for a purpose of seeing a video on another little webinar I was featured on IG. Anyhow, so I went to my profile, tried to the settings, and I couldn't remember my password because it was forever, right? And there wasn't a way for them to send me a link to reset it. All it was for them to email me a link to log in to my account. And there isn't a way. And to reset my password, I have to provide my old password. So there's no way for me to override the password with my password, a new one, so that I can close it out. So I just logged out and I'll just never log back in.
Oh, no.
But so that's what it puts me to. And I think Facebook or IG does that so that they quote unquote don't lose users. You know, they don't want people to delete their accounts.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, sorry. So the problem that you talked about before, I think it's just bad design, not necessarily dark design. Dark design is purposeful. Like you're saying that they want to, it would be more like if you were trying to delete your account and the link was within through all this legalese, or they use double negatives to kind of trick you into staying, but not letting you be able to like gain access into your account again. That doesn't help them. They're obviously going to lose a user. So I think that's just poor design rather than dark design.
Well, and even if it's easy access to get into the account. You can experiment yourself how it is. Like they'll send me a link to log in, and it's very easy to get in. But in order for me to delete my account, I have to put in my password, and I can't.
Oh, to
put in
delete
my
account. Sorry,
password.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Oh yeah, that definitely.
Yeah. So
that they do that
on with
purposefully.
what Roman is like inquiring about clicks and all that stuff, just make sure that the flow of use makes sense and that there's a solution to what the person wants to do. Amen. Over.
So going off of that, I know you mentioned that user interface design is more of a qualitative approach rather than a quantitative. But I'm wondering, how have you been able to use a quantitative approach to improve your qualitative design? Have you been able to take any sort of measurements as far as how users are interacting with, you know, whatever interface you're designing, and then apply those measurements to improve on the design?
Sorry, I think I'm not quite understanding.
So when you say qualitative versus quantitative, right? You're saying the design process is more of a qualitative approach.
No, sorry, yeah, my explanation was bad then. The quantitative qualitative is on the research aspect. It's not the interface itself. That's why there's that separation between UX and UI. Right. But so if you're talking about how would you interpret qualitative research data?
Right. So I mean, how can you use measured research data as far as taking a quantitative approach to design, and then apply that data to improve the qualitative aspect of your design, as in increase the quality of your design by taking a quantitative approach to how your users interact with it?
So if I'm understanding correctly, one of them would be like, how long does it take a user to do a task? That's one that I use often. So if you're trying out different designs, that's an easy way. If it took the same user much longer with the other design, that's certainly indicating there that you need to change something. It won't be able to change you exactly what you need to do. It'll just indicate where the problem is at.
Okay.
But then that's where you do the talking, the qualitative. That's where you get the qualitative data. You talk with them like why did you try to go there instead of using this big ass button that we have over here? And then you'll understand their way of thinking. And then when you understand how their mental model or how their understanding of this interface should work to them, or how they expect it to work, then you can make your design decisions based on that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Can I add to that actually? So this is a little bit of the risk, and that's what Airbnb does, the product management metrics, where you instrument the metrics into your UX, because ultimately a user on your website to achieve a certain action. And so you could actually measure how frequently they got to that action. So if it takes you 3 clicks to get to that action, and in the middle you introduced a new, I don't know, your button all of a sudden disappeared or moved away to a different screen, and now you see your monthly users, you actually get less time to the action they need to get. This, which means that you somewhere introduced problems in your UX and you could improve it. Or you could see the opposite, where you move the button, make it more prominent, you change the font, it really pops. Now you see more users actually get to navigate to book the experience, or inquire or leave a feedback about the experience on Airbnb, for example, right? And so you measure those clicks, you measure those tasks the user performs on your site, and then you could actually make decisions how to improve your UX based on those quantitative metrics.
Yeah. No,
Right,
definitely.
that makes sense.
It's good to have both.
Absolutely.
Cool. Looks like we've.
I have a question. My question is, what does the tool set look like for UX designers, and also kind of like what does the handoff process look like to the UI developers, right? Like I know that you probably work closely with them, right? But technically, what does the tool set look like, and how can you hand them artifacts in a way that's valuable to them?
So a lot of it at the beginning is pen and paper. You don't want to go into making something that looks nice and then have to go pixel by pixel fixing things. Personas are a good artifact that you can give to developers. So while they're going through and making decisions on like even features, thinking about features, that will help the mindset, is this even a good idea to try to implement this feature? But ideally, you're working close together. How I work with my team, I have a general wireframe, get critiques on that, make it into a mock-up prototype, get testing. And then then I work with the front-end developer, he actually implements it, and I'm there as, what's it called? Like advising, consulting, working with that. So it's like a pair programming, pair designing, getting the interface to where it needs to be. And but not every team is like that. Like I'm the UX team of one, which is really sad. If you have a larger UX team, I think there might be more detailed, the mockups would be more detailed, probably, like have a lot of information, like, okay, this is the user flow. Well, that's one I didn't have a picture of, but it's user flow would take the screens. It's like, okay, this is how we intend the user to do this task. They're going to go this screen, this screen, this screen. So that would be one thing that you can give to developers. The prototypes themselves, a lot of like the CSS code, if you use tools, oh yeah, that's what's really. So Figma is a really good tool. I really like Figma. They do have like a free, I'm not sure how many boards are free, but you can like use at least like some of it for free and try it out yourself if you'd like to. It's a really good resource. They've added so much different functionality that you have in there to make a really complex prototype, but also they have tools for mind mapping and doing the collaboration aspect. And then ideally you're doing that together with your team. So everyone has the same level of baseline understanding, because that's where the miscommunications can happen if you're not on the same understanding. Does that answer? Not sure. There's a couple different programs. Figma is just really nice because you can collaborate and you can share like a link to a prototype versus like sending whatever file for someone to interact with. It's a lot easier for collaboration and easier. You can work on any computer, that type of thing. But there's also Sketch. There is Adobe XD. If you have an Adobe cloud subscription, they're also a tool. Kind of biased against them because they promised updates every week and that did not happen. Is that along the lines of?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I think just working closely with the designer is best. Like when you're doing the actual building, because otherwise that would just become a waterfall type thing, right? You just hand over your designs. Okay, make it look like this, make this real. That's not really good, right? I mean, that's the reason why you have DevOps, right?
So what kind of audiences do you use for your development? Like, you show this in front of the client or the users that are supposed to be using the site?
Wait, sorry, what was the first part?
So the question is, who is the audience that sees your mock-ups first? Your first thoughts, so to speak. Like, I know you're going to iterate through these things, but a real user is normally the user base to do these types of studies because you use normally anonymous user for user-based studies, right?
Yes, ideally. So it really depends on the team and your process and how much money you have. It's easier to get testers through different websites. I think usertesting.com is one. If you have money to invest, you can have your web, like, I think you have to define what the task you want them to do. And then it just collects the data of how they done it and how many clicks and how long did it take and that sort of thing. The different stages, like you can present wireframes to like a user, possible user, but I find that it's a little too abstracted and they don't really, like it doesn't feel real to them. So they don't really understand like, oh, this is how I would interact with it quite as much. It also depends. Wireframes, no, wireframes are good when I'm working with developers because I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Please put it visually. What did you expect or what did you have in mind? And then we worked based on that. But in terms of like presenting the design, once I presented to CEO and it was my first week on the job, and he said, we didn't hire you to draw boxes. So that was fun. So for him, basically, you needed to show the prototype stage where it looks realistic and it looks like what it's supposed to be, the end of product. And that was how you get feedback from him. So it really depends. If you have limited resources, I would wait till like save the wireframe testing for your colleagues or whoever you can grab and say like, hey, what do you think of this? How would you do this? Using a quick prototype, a low fidelity prototype that's like maybe just based on your wireframe. It's not pretty at all, but here's the general, here's how you would interact with it. Could do, I think you could do with friends or family, but it's the final one that you really want to try to get the people who are your actual users.
So this would actually have, the prototype would have actually the finalized, so to speak, themes, colors, and styles associated with each page and progression through whatever you're doing, correct?
Yes.
And this is normally in collaboration, I'm assuming, with some corporate thought or some style of what is the need of the site, correct?
Oh, wait, sorry, I don't understand that one. That question.
Well, normally, if you're creating a public website,
Mhm.
whoever the client has some theme or some choice of color scheme or something that they're trying to achieve by a style that, let's use a bank, for instance. A bank would have logos and whatnot, and therefore they would have some kind of style guide that they would only want you to use an approved idea. Wouldn't
Yes.
other clients also want these types of thoughts to be associated with their total finished product idea?
Oh, if you're like presenting what it's supposed to look like this is pretty much, if you approve of this, we're finalizing and coding this. You should already have those styles integrated.
But shouldn't
That's where
that be
the UI
given to the
designer comes in.
developers? The developers should have that before you, because you're going to show a finalized style at some point as
Yeah,
a
so
final
you show
prototype.
it before you program anything, before you code anything.
Yeah, so the dev people have that before they code, right?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, thank you. That's what I'm looking for. Roundabout way.
Yes.
Question. Wouldn't you want to tie in your user testing to your personas? Because if you just go randomly selecting your users for user testing, but your persona is in a completely different type of user.
Yeah. So again, it depends on your resources. Ideally, you want people who match your personas. The user groups that you are aiming for is just harder to do. So when it's limited, that's why I was like, it's better to have it when you're more high fidelity, more iterations down to do testing with real people. If you can only find like 3, I think 5 is like the standard number of testing to have. So if you can find more than 5 that are fitting in your group, that's great. But it's definitely a resource-based thing. But if you have access, yeah, definitely do all that fit.
Would it be 5 per persona or 5 total, kind of across?
Oh, 5 for your testing. Sorry, that ties into like if the persona was a student, then finding 5 different students. And if you had 10 different students, that's great. But if you only had 3 students in the earlier stages, you could probably find like 2 coworkers, because there will be some aspects of the design that like anyone would have that kind of understanding of how to log in or how to delete an account, right? You don't have to be a subject matter expert. But then for the security compliance, that you actually need someone who actually knows anything about security compliance to test those portions.
Right, especially coming from a DevOps perspective, it can be really helpful to have multiple users testing a product through the UI, because you get that full range as far as all your services being tested all the way from the UI back to the infrastructure. And having
Yes.
multiple people do it can start breaking things on the back end.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, both ends. Testing on both things.
Right.
Does it work and can they use it?
Right, being able to map that back to UI elements can be really helpful.
Yeah, always test with people and not people on your team. I had a friend who works at Google and he said, oh, we just walk down the hallway and ask people to test. I'm like, you're Google, you have all this money. You can go out on the street and ask people to test your interface. But getting different perspectives, different people interacting, it's always good.
I want to jump in and mention something to Peter about the towards the end of the final look of how you want the website for a customer to look. Another thing to look into is what they call, a design system. Envision, they can help companies kind of help create a design system in that it gives a cohesive feel. It's more uniform. It's like, think of it as a 3-piece suit or something. Like it matches and it all ties together. So depending on who your customer is and what their aim is, whether it's a doctor's office or a child daycare place, you can look into doing a design system for your build out. I don't know how that ties into like trying to get it all like plugged into the whole coding
Actually, no,
part,
those
but
are design systems are perfect, actually.
yeah.
That's
So,
another way you can work with your developers. If you're like, okay, I have this type of form, this type of button, you have it all stylized already, but then you're giving them the code. Okay, this is the code that you're going to need, and these are the CSS classes that are going to need to be applied. But then they can do like a not piecemeal, but they can grab those portions and make the site. So they don't necessarily have to wait on a wireframe or mockup from the designer. They could go ahead and just start using the different components, having different components and having all that designed beforehand. They just worry about the structure. Again, you want the designer to look at it and you have input and then get it tested, but it definitely speeds up production in that way.
I have a question. This is something that I've been running into a lot lately is the constant feedback loop where you show people your design and they have a bunch of feedback. And then you show them the updated design and you have a lot of feedback. And then you show them the updated design and it's just, oh, just change this word to this. And then by the time they see it, they want it changed back to the way you had it originally. That kind of thing. Shutting down that kind of not helpful, but kind of trying to be helpful, but end up back where you started kind of help.
Yeah, so those are fun. Back in design school, we had a professor like that. We would just not change our design and the next week she would approve of it. For dealing with users, that's where testing really helps, because then it's like, it doesn't matter whether they would prefer the button to be blue or not. If your testing has shown that it's easier for users to find being this color or whatever, it's hard for them to argue against data. And in terms of wording that way too, it's good to get their input in that they think like, oh, like this wording is what we use in our industry the most often. So this is what people are going to understand. You could be like, great, put it in. And then do your testing. And if they say like, oh, we got to change it, it's like, actually, it worked perfectly fine. We don't need to change it. This is our result, or these are our data and our results.
Okay.
So that's nice about quantitative.
Yeah.
People like numbers.
That's going to be very helpful. I'm going to start tracking numbers as well. That makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of testing. And then if it's just regular, like if it's just testers and not like your client, I would go to different users. I wouldn't go to the same user to test over and over.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Then you'll avoid that loop. And they won't be able to change their mind because they're not going to have a second opinion. You're going to have fresh eyes looking at your new design and all the changes you've made.
and I might add too that if you're having users test your site or whatever, have a recording so that way you can capture the little nuances of where their eye flow or eye direction goes and any non-verbal communication cues. Sometimes it's also good to do that, whether it's video, I think is best, or recording. So that way you're not writing down your notes on the notepad. You're, kind of being a fly on the wall, so to speak, because sometimes users will feel like they need to please the tester, like make sure that they're doing a good job, but that's not, it's human nature, to do well. So it's supposed to be kind of a fluid flow and allows them to either get through the flow of the app or website. So yeah, so that's my 2 bits. Just make sure that you kind of capture it through video or recording.
Those are good, especially when you have to share that data with somebody else, because then it's objective. But a way to reduce the them trying to do what makes the tester happy, you have to remind them that you are testing the design, not the user. Like, I'm not testing you, I just need to test if this works. If you don't get it, that what we thought you were gonna do, that's not on you, that's the design. And then we have to go and fix that. So that alleviates that bit of pressure. Also, if you say that you weren't part of the design process at all, even if it's a lie, that usually helps a lot, because then they don't have to worry about hurting your feelings or anything like that.
That's really good advice. Thank you.
And if you're not able to do recording, it's good to have two people. Like if you're doing an interview or doing someone's running the actual, like, please do this task, do this, this, and have the other person taking notes. So that really helps. So that person's not having to focus on two different things, trying to give directions and take notes at the same time. And having multiple eyes, you catch more things. You just don't want to rely on recording too much. Again, it depends on your resources. Depends on what tools you have access to. Eye tracking is really good, but those are really expensive. I'm never having access to them, but like those are very interesting in that they can track like where do people focus on the most. And what's the flow that their eye travels. Those are really good. So if you have access to those, absolutely do some eye tracking as well.
Man, this is great. Y'all aren't letting Iris off easy. Any other thoughts or questions before we call it for the night?
I didn't think about this before. My company is actually looking for a user experience person. I work for Next Phase Services and Solutions. I just saw the email come out. So look them up if you're interested in doing user experience.
You can put a link in the chat if you want, Keisha.
Great idea, but I will not probably do that because on my phone. Actually,
Put it on the meetup page.
I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out.
Cool. Anything else? Any other requests for resources? Like while I'm looking through all my bookmarks anyway.
Actually, I'm also a teacher. If you have any resources that you recommend to your own students, that would be really helpful for me as far as recommending things to my students.
What type of resources? Sorry, like are you talking about like actual prototyping tools or just concepts?
Anything that you have, like you know, for a student who comes to me and says, you know, I'm interested in UX, you know, I'm more code oriented. So where would you know, where would I send them? Like what kind of I love the books. I already took notes on the books that you sent. That's great. But if you have anything else that you think of, and you don't have to do it right now, obviously, you know, over the next couple of days, weeks, that would be absolutely awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I think the book is a really great start. That video is even a better start before they like, if they're like, don't really read. Some of my students, they didn't read. So having that video really helps. There are a lot of blogs. The only thing I would say, like on Medium, a lot of different designers will be putting like their own articles, but there is, UX is such a new field. So there's no correct exact way of doing things. It depends on so many contexts. So when you have students go on to a site like Medium or I think UX Collective.cc has a ton of articles, just have to remind them to take things with a grain of salt and try get multiple perspectives and kind of make their own judgment on that. Like that one meme, this one went around a lot, but for them to make sure like, okay, don't take it as the absolute truth because there isn't. Still developing. UX
Right.
had to steal from psychology and computer science and sociology. There's a lot in flux.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
If I find more, I'll definitely send those links as well. Oh, what type of students are they? Sorry, that should be a better question.
They are community college students.
What are they studying?
They are in web design classes.
Okay. Okay.
So we teach them things like wireframing. You know, and basically building off of wireframes that they've created. But you know, the UX portion of the class is maybe a week. And I think that would be something that I could build a little bit more into, or at least provide more resources for.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. And definitely, I highly recommend Figma for students.
Okay.
They have an education license too, but that allows a lot of experimenting, and I think prototyping is a really good skill for them.
Okay. What's your feeling like balsamic and like that type of tool?
Balsamic's okay. I've maybe tried it many years ago, and I was like, that one's paid, right?
There's a free and a paid portion
Oh,
of it.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, as long as there's a free version, sounds good to me. It's not one I personally use,
Okay.
just because Figma just has been so convenient that it's all on the cloud, that I could just send a link to my developer, that my students can just send a link to me, their prototypes, and I can give them critique and comments right there.
Gotcha. Now, is that more, what would you say, like industry standard? Like, what are the big 2 or 3 that are used in industry? Figma, obviously.
Sketch is another one, but
Yeah.
I think they've been a bit, Figma has gone a little past them. XD is one, InVision. There might be a couple more. I think though the tool does not matter so much as long as they get the general idea of how to use those tools in general, and how to do prototyping, and how to do the mockups and whatnot, because you never know when a software that was really hot like 2 years ago, if they'll go kaput and they'll be no longer the next big thing. They should be able to just apply those skills and learn the next software really quickly. So it's not good to just rely on just one, but if you do, then it's Figma. Yeah, it doesn't really matter as long as you get what you need in terms of like how complicated you need your prototypes to be, or how much detail that you do need for your mockups, things like that. But any tool.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Call it a last chance. Have any more questions for the expert? I think you've exhausted them, Iris. That was great. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Iris. This has been really good.
Thank you.
The good stuff is always in the conversation, and you totally delivered tonight. All right, and we'll call it a wrap there.